So was the 30th anniversary event a success? Today, guys, we're going to be reviewing this entire event, including the new 6-player activity, Dares of Eternity, as well as the new dungeon, Grasp of Avarice. And then I also want to pivot a little bit and talk about pricing, which I really don't like to dive into the monetary side of Destiny, but considering we will eventually be having dungeons sold separately, unless Bungie has gone back on that and said they're not going to do that, Grasp of Avarice, what's kind of a glimpse of how dungeons are going to be monetized in the future. Because quite frankly, the 30th anniversary event, even though I'm including Dares of Eternity in that, and all the weapons and loot that comes with it, that's a free-to-play activity. Dares of Eternity is free. The Forerunner exotic sidearm, free. The new battle rifle, free. And a number of other weapons. And what you're actually paying $25 for is really for the ornament sets, Ias Luna, 1,000-Yard Stare, Thorn Armor sets, Hero of Aegis Sword, and of course, Galahorn. On top of that, access to a very, and I mean very good dungeon. So let's start first with everything that was included in the update. First up, Sandbox-wise, this was arguably the biggest shakeup of this year, even bigger than the stasis changes earlier this year. The dynamic cooldown changes that rolled out this month has flipped the meta on its head, and you're gonna notice that this coming up weekend when we're playing Trials of Osiris. My go-to builds have now changed. Subclasses that I normally use every single day when playing PvP are no longer my go-to subclasses, and I have to include these Sandbox changes when we talk about the 30th anniversary event, despite it being free, because quite frankly, it's a good chance that $25 for this expansion or this event paid the payroll for these Sandbox updates. And it's no coincidence here that Bungie rolled all of these changes out alongside this event. Now, to add even more shakeup to the Sandbox, the new batch of weapons that were added. Fellas, if you would have told me that a lightweight pulse rifle would have been meta in this Sandbox, I would have thought you were delusional, which rightfully so. Do you see people using bad juju? Is anybody going, hey, Trials this weekend, bring Chattering Bone? Hell, I forgot about lightweight so much, I even forgot Outbreak existed. But the BXR, aka the Halo Battle Rifle, has definitely shaken the meta up. It has completely revived pulse rifles inside of PvP and completely revived an archetype that many of us forgot about. And on top of that, Bungie added the Halo Magnum, which is the exotic sidearm, the Forerunner, which can 3-tap from crazy ranges. And yeah, that's another weapon that is shaking things up. Which, by the way, those two weapons are completely accessible to free-to-play players, and they have definitely shaken the meta up quite a bit. Now, the 6-player activity itself, Dares of Eternity, is an extremely comical activity. We get to see a new sign of Xur that we've never seen before, and he's actually pretty hilarious. And I don't know who voiced the horse lines, but them nays, they're all right. Like, I'd say what, 6 out of 10, 7 out of 10? I've heard some better nays, but I also grew up on a farm. Overall, though, the activity, being a 6-player activity, offers a lot of challenges with different sets of difficulties, jump puzzles throughout, and although not as serious as some of the other 6-player activities that we've received during, say, seasonal content, to me, considering its entire vibe, especially with the return there to Eternity, I find it to be better. Now, granted, the benchmark for 6-player activities is still Menagerie. To this day, I think Menagerie is still the best, hands down. But for a free-to-play activity, Dares of Eternity knocked it out of the park. Now, 2 things that Bungie did with this activity that made it good. Number 1, it had some guesswork in it, right? Especially going into that final room. That final room when you're standing on the platforms outside and you guess which doorway it's gonna be. That's fun. And despite it being the same activity, it feels like you have options. As in, the path isn't just a straight one, but can take a left or right turn. And that to me is what made Menagerie so good. You didn't really know which way you were gonna go to get to the final boss. And for Dares of Eternity, you just don't know what the final room is gonna be. All of which is intriguing, and it simultaneously keeps me engaged. Whereas other activities, Vex Offensive, for example, I would just fall asleep. What's sad is Vex Offensive wasn't even the worst one, and that was a seasonal activity. Now, the second thing that Dares of Eternity got right is loot, man. The loot system overall, from the treasure chest room to the accessible loot that's out and about, where you can literally go out there and target loot some of those items, but the chest right there at the front, which doesn't drop you 100 different weapons that are in the raw loot pool, but instead gives you targeted loot for this activity, is really nice. Between the trace rifle, even the grenade launcher, the shotgun, the energy swords, even though I don't think the void one even exists. I'm not lying, I don't think it exists. I haven't got one. And the BR, the loot here is actually very giving. And if you're a new player to Destiny 2, this may not seem like that big of a deal, but we've been playing Destiny for years, and yes, there were definitely times where Bungie was so stingy on loot, you just didn't even want to do the activity. Overall, just judging the 30th anniversary event off of the free-to-play event, it killed it completely, which takes me to the paid content. This is the Grasp of Avarice dungeon. This also includes a number of weapons, but mainly returning weapons, such as Ias Luna, Matador, and 1,000-Yard Stare, and of course, Gallahorn, which is really the big one there, right? Like, don't get me wrong, I'm excited about all these other weapons, but I think the main reason why we drop money on this thing is for Gallahorn, and rightfully so. Gallahorn is really, really good. There's also a Thorn armor set, and if you do the higher difficulty of the dungeon, you can also get this armor set with a 5th armor slot, which if you're rocking like lower cost mods, think like artifact mods, this will allow you to slot an extra mod, which is really nice, and I would highly suggest farming for this set, especially going into Witch Queen. Now, the dungeon overall is fantastic. To me, it's a good mix of being not only a dungeon that's difficult, but its overall vibe seems to be pulling from many of our other exotic quests. Think like Dead Man's Tale and Outbreak Perfected. I think aesthetically, the Prophecy dungeon is still the most beautiful dungeon, and in pure scope, I think the Shattered Throne is still the #1. But Grasp of Avarice, the more I do this dungeon, the more I enjoy it, which is normally the opposite of doing any activity inside of Destiny, right? Especially like exotic quests. You get that first initial high from completing it, and then afterwards it's just kind of like, yeah, it's fun, but just give me my loot, Bungie. I think the moment that I fell in love with Grasp of Avarice was the Sparrow scene. No, it's not SRL, but by God, it's close enough, right? At some levels though, can you imagine if Bungie really invested into a Sparrow Racing League and gave us crazy tracks with all kinds of booby traps and stuff spread out, especially considering all the Sparrows we have today that we could flex? Oh, I'd play it. And it was this moment right here, especially like going into the chutes and shooting off into that last bit, that really made me say, hey, this dungeon is special. Now, Bungie intentionally targeted our nostalgia bone with this dungeon, from its access point being the OG loot cave, which many of us back in D1 spent many hours farming before it got patched, of course, through all of the weapons that are dropping from this dungeon. Bungie intentionally did this. Marketing at its finest, and it works because it got me to buy it, and I know it got many of you to buy it. But I do have to bring up a couple things here, and that's really the split between paid and non-paid players. Because truthfully speaking, even though this dungeon is fantastic, and I love all the loot that came with it, but I do need to discuss the pricing. And the question you have to ask yourself, is this bit of content right here worth $25? And it's really hard to say yes to that when you stand it side by side next to the free-to-play content. Don't get me wrong, I like these ornament sets that we get, the emotes that we get, the exotic sparrow, the ship, but in terms of functionality, I would argue and say you get just as much from the free-to-play activity as you do from the paid content, and maybe even more, especially if you just play PvP. Now, I'm not bringing this up to say you should take away more content from free-to-play players. I'm simply just concerned considering we just all opened up and bought a dungeon for $25. Granted, I know this included a lot of other weapons as well as an exotic, but my concern is considering that we have been told that dungeons will be able to be purchased separately in the coming seasons, what the pricing may be for that. Now, I think for many of us, we bought Witch Queen Deluxe, which included the 30th anniversary event, which I believe is somewhere around like $100, which for a year of Destiny content is a good deal. I've got an MMORPG background, dropping $15 a month on top of paying for annual expansions. That's just normal. But talking about $25 for what's being packaged as half of an event, because that's what it is. In your mind, when you buy this thing, you're thinking you're getting Dares of Eternity, all the loot that's involved with that, and the average dungeon. But in reality, you're just getting the dungeon, 4 weapons, and an exotic. And that's where I start to get a little concerned with the price point here. Now, was it purposely done this way to get you to buy the annual expansion, which is clearly the better deal? Probably so. But an accurate price point for this, for the 4 weapons, the exotic, and the dungeon, is around $15. That to me is a fair price. Now, I know someone's gonna bring up Cross, the ornaments. Look at all the ornaments you get. The Marathon ornament sets, Flaming Tiger, the emotes, all that stuff. And this is where I think Bungie needs to go with this, because they do package all of this together and hand out these ornament sets that some of us may very well rock. You may be rocking it right now, and some of them I really do like, and some of them not so much. As someone who purchases a lot of weapon ornaments, more than anything, more than armor ornaments or any emotes, what matters to me more than anything is the look of my weapon, and that is where I will drop some money on. It would be nice in these situations, especially when it comes to bundled packages like the 30th anniversary, to somehow redeem what those ornament sets would normally cost silver-wise, and instead redeem that silver toward an ornament set that we want, whether that is another armor ornament set or a specific emote that you're going after, or that sexy malfeasance ornament. To me, I would feel much better about my purchase. So I know we're getting really caught up on the price point here, but going forward, we will begin to see dungeons potentially being sold separately. I don't think the price point will be $25, considering that Bungie probably put that hefty price tag on there for Gallahorn. And it's not that I don't want Bungie to make money. I do. They make more money. This equals more content for us. And for the most part, this entire event has really nailed everything I could have asked for. But I can't help but get a little nervous when observing the monetary differences here between those that do purchase events like the 30th anniversary package and just free-to-play players. And let's be real, the majority of the players in Destiny are paid players. Most people that play Destiny are a hardcore player, and they're purchasing everything. Whether it's a price tag like you see here on this 30th anniversary event, or it's gobbles of silver for different ornament sets, the Destiny community is by and large the most gracious community when it comes to their money. And I just want to make sure going forward that this hefty price tag won't become a reoccurring price tag. So that's all, guys. That's my TED Talk / 30th anniversary event review. So let me know in the comments below what you think. Have you been enjoying this? Is the price tag fine with you? Really curious to know what y'all's thoughts are. Well, fellas and ladies, thank you all for coming and watching. And as always,
slap that like button like your mama told you right.